Hi, I'm Jessica the Museum Guide, and today I'm walking you through one of the world's most macabre museums, the Catacombs in Paris. This ancient complex of mines is home to more than 6 million skeletal remains, a city of the dead buried deep beneath the streets of the French capital. This video is a must-watch before you visit the catacombs, or even if you just want to visit them from the comfort of your own home and follow along with me. My channel is all about the weird and wonderful museums and heritage sites in Europe and beyond, so please like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. We start our tour today by descending the spiral staircase, 131 steps to be exact, to reach 20 meters below the ground, around 65 feet. And we finally emerge into narrow corridors that feel like cave walls. There are no bones yet, but trust me, they're coming. The catacombs cover more than 300 kilometers, that's around 200 miles, beneath the 5th, 6th, 14th, and 15th arrondissement of Paris. Of this vast labyrinth of tunnels, quarries, and rooms, only a small fraction is accessible to the public. I will guide you through the section operated as a museum, which is open to the public for a cost of 29 euros. The catacombs' official name is the Denfert Rochereau ossuary. An ossuary is a fancy word for a collection of bones, and there are many ossuaries found all throughout Europe. Some, like the Capuchin Monastery in Rome or the Sedlec ossuary in Kutná-Hora, Czech Republic, are extremely elaborate. But the Parisian catacombs have a special charm all of their own. They're also home to around 6 million inhabitants, relocated here as part of a massive public works project in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. As we enter this sacred and fascinating place, let me tell you the story of the Paris catacombs. Check out this street sign. At the time that this ossuary was built, this network was referred to as a copy of Paris, but now these ghostly street signs are often all that remain of pre-19th century Paris, before Haussmann's grand redesign that demolished much of the medieval city. As we enter this strange and fascinating place, let me tell you the story of how the Paris catacombs became an ossuary. It starts back in the 18th century, but of course, this is Paris, so it actually dates back far earlier. Much of this magnificent city was built with stones from quarries right beneath the city itself, some of them dating back to Roman times. And right now, we're in one of those quarries. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the city expanded and grew, and its graveyards were growing as well. The bigger population now needed more and more places to bury its dead. By this point, Paris had become a major metropolis with more than 500,000 residents and all manner of grand monuments, buildings, and boulevards, and most importantly, cemeteries. However, many people who lived in the City of Light were oblivious to the danger brewing beneath their feet. See, of course the city was smelly and putrid, with its cemeteries and churchyards overflowing and polluting the water and air. The problem was so bad that it was said that the wine was turning bad and the milk was curdling. For a similar story in London, watch my video about the London Necropolis Railway, linked above. But there was an even more alarming danger in Paris than the diseased ooze escaping from the coffins. Remember, Paris's ancient quarries had essentially led to Swiss cheese beneath its streets. In 1774, a series of basement walls collapsed around the Holy Innocents Cemetery, first established in 1130. The massive weight of more than 2 million Parisians buried in that cemetery's mass graves finally reached a breaking point, and there was widespread fear that more collapses could devastate the city. Of course, cholera outbreaks caused by contamination from mass graves were also a huge problem, and Louis XVI, then King of France, knew he needed to take action. A plan was hatched to build a charnel house, essentially a building for storing disinterred skeletal remains, to end all charnel houses, and that's where we're exploring today. Let's continue. We can see markings like these, which were first used here in the quarries to prevent workers from getting lost, and also to mark inspections and different phases of work. Here we come across signage for the Arcueil Aqueduct, which was built between 1613 and 1623 by an order from Marie de Medici. These aqueducts brought water from Rungis to Paris via a stone tunnel just below the ground surface. Later, part of this aqueduct collapsed, an ongoing problem. This area here is called the workshop or l'atelier, and we can see parts of the original working workshop still visible. Check out the two different types of pillars supporting the quarry ceiling, which date back to medieval times and prevent the structure from collapsing. Well, most of the time. We're approaching this very ominous door. It really gives our visit a serious weight and gravity. The translation is "Stop. This is the Empire of Death," letting us know that we're entering into the ossuary. Let's just take a moment to take it all in. The first few moments in this section of the catacombs are truly awe-inspiring. I found myself saying, wow, even though this wasn't my first visit. Here, we can see a lamp that used to be lit with oil. It would signal to the workers that there was enough oxygen in the air for it to be safe for them, almost like a canary in a coal mine. When the sepulchral lamp snuffed out, they had to leave in a hurry, but we don't have to worry today as modern air vents have been installed. Let's get back to the history of the catacombs. The great relocation of skeletal remains began in 1786 as a procession of covered wagon hearses transported the remains from most of Paris's cemeteries to a mine shaft, which was open near the Rue de la Tombe Issoire. At first, workmen just dumped the bones into great heaps. Imagine that, it was just messy piles of bones everywhere, all higgledy-piggledy. However, by 1809, the inspector of the quarries, a man called Héricard de Thury, decided to turn the site more into a museum, and he oversaw a project to neatly stack the bones into these walls called hegs, a French masonry term that references the quarry's past. Some of the stacks cleverly hide support columns, which were necessary to try to prevent collapses at street level. Remember, these remains had long since decayed, so the femurs and skulls were easy to stack and balance. We can see here that they almost look like building blocks, easily notched together like a tongue and groove. The rest of the bones are here, however, they're out of sight behind these walls. De Thury was also very concerned with keeping some semblance of order amidst the chaos of the bones. Therefore, he created signage for each cemetery within the catacombs, and there are signs throughout the entire complex that let you know which cemetery the bones came from and which date they were moved. De Thury was very concerned with ritual and respect, and he wanted this to be a place of grandeur, awe, meditation, and even fear. That's why we can see the geometric shapes and other theatrical decor, including some of the bone sculptures, such as this heart. By the way, the bone walls, the hegs, do occasionally have to be rebuilt. This is a humid place and water drips down on you as you make your way through, and it also weakens the structures. That's why some of the hegs deteriorate and need upkeep, and you can see here some that will be redone in the coming months. When curators update them, they add a new stone foundation to insulate them from the damp ground and remove any cement or mortar that was added in the 19th century, but that we now know is harmful for the bones in the long run. Now, I came here today on my own. As I mentioned, I'd been here before, but if you choose to take a guided tour, you'll see a few additional sites that I didn't visit today. You'll, for instance, pass through the Port Mahon corridor and see the magnificent sculptures completed by French quarrymen named Françoise Gillain. Sadly, this room's not open to self-guided tourists because of damage to the carvings in the past. But if you book one of the tours linked in my description below, you'll be able to see it on your visit. And trust me, it's worth it to see de Thury's stunning replica of the fortress of Port Mahon, found in Minorca, Spain. Amazingly, he sculpted it from memory, as he was once imprisoned in the fortress. I don't guide the catacombs myself, but I have linked some great guides down below in the description. This is the Fountain de la Samaritan, which means the Fountain of the Samaritan Woman. It's not actually a fountain, it's a well. The circular area around the well was comprised of bones from the Cemetery of the Innocents, and this well provides access to clean water from a small groundwater table. The quarry workers used this well water to make the mortar that they constructed the hags, the bone walls, with. Now, this is a very sobering sight, some of the memorials to those killed in the French Revolution. Many guillotine victims were brought directly here rather than to a cemetery, including notable leaders such as Robespierre, Lavoisier, and Danton, all of whom were beheaded in 1794. Some say that the holes here in the skulls are bullet holes, visible evidence of those murdered by being shot rather than guillotined, but there's no evidence for this. These holes could also be damage from tools or other causes, but it is interesting to think about. There are different signs here that refer to major events of the French Revolution, including fighting at the Réveillon factory in Faubourg Saint-Antoine on 28 April 1789, where a workers' protest ended in a massacre, and, quote, fighting at the Château des Tuileries on 10 August 1792, where Swiss guards fought against Parisian units. During this time period, the catacombs were temporarily used as a morgue. There were some famous people who were initially interred at public cemeteries, moved here to the catacombs in the late 18th century, and then moved to Père Lachaise Cemetery when it opened in 1804 to give it a bit of razzle-dazzle and star attraction. I'm talking about Moliere and Jean de La Fontaine. Moliere was a controversial French playwright, and when he died in 1673, the parish priest of Saint Eustache refused to conduct his religious burial. However, at the request of Louis XIV, the Archbishop of Paris authorized that he could be buried in the cemetery of Saint Joseph, but there could be no ceremony, and his body had to be transported at night. In 1792, the revolutionary government recovered Moliere's remains for the Museum of French Monuments, and then eventually, in 1817, his bones were recovered and placed at Père Lachaise. Jean de La Fontaine was a similarly controversial French poet and fabulist, or writer of fables, and he died in 1695. There were rumors that he too had been interred in the catacombs, and so when the revolutionary government were removing the remains of Moliere, they also snagged the remains of La Fontaine for their museum, and then later they too were moved to Père Lachaise. Today, de La Fontaine and Moliere lay side by side in Division 25 at Père Lachaise. Or do they? Despite their grand monuments at the world-famous cemetery, no one really knows if these are actually their bones beneath the surface, and especially in the case of de La Fontaine, it's highly unlikely. It's rather strange that in this huge maze of human remains in the museum section of the catacombs, there is only one gravestone to an individual person, and that's to Françoise Gillain. She was an academic who in 1784 was honored by l'Académie Française with the Crown of Virtue for her work with the French language. But why she's especially honored here is because she spent many years of her life trying to free a writer who was unjustly held in the Bastille. What's very interesting about this gravestone is that, yes, this is commemorating an individual person. However, it also reminds us of all of the other people, 6 million plus, who don't have tombstones, whose names we don't know. So it serves as an interesting contrast. As we make our way towards the exit and the spiral staircase back to street level, we enter into an area called the Crypt of the Passion and its Tibia Rotunda. This macabre barrel shape is actually an elaborate art piece of skulls and tibias that are hiding a support column. This was the site of a truly bizarre concert held here on 2nd April 1897 between midnight and 2 a.m. The information was advertised in the newspaper, and more than 100 attendees arrived on foot, warned not to park their carriages nearby and cause a ruckus, which would cause curious locals to flood inside. The elite group were then treated to Chopin's Funeral March and the Danse Macabre by Camille Saint-Saëns, amongst other pieces. Already by the 19th century, the catacombs attracted adventure seekers, the curious, and the morbid. That sounds like me. Speaking of truly morbid, let me answer a question that you might have been wondering. Is it possible to get lost in the catacombs? Look, if you're on a guided tour or you go on the self-guided route, the answer is absolutely not. However, urban explorers, known as Cataphiles, have long viewed the catacombs as the ultimate challenge, and they enter through secret ducts and sewer grates. As recently as 2017, 3 teens got lost in the labyrinth for 3 days. Thankfully, they were rescued, but a man called Philibert Asper died in the maze in 1793, and his body wasn't found until 11 years later, tragically close to an exit. This memorial is in an off-limits area. If you like scary movies, watch the 2014 faux documentary horror film As Above, So Below. I found it quite scary, and I don't scare easily. Now, speaking of cataphiles, in 2004, Parisian police were doing a training exercise in a poorly mapped section of the catacombs beneath the Palais de Chaillot. That's when they discovered a strange sight, a sign that said, "Building site, no access," in a place it definitely didn't belong. When they went closer, an intimidating recording of barking dogs was triggered. While this would make me turn tail, they realized something was a bit strange, and they went further. They soon discovered a 500 square meter cavern that had been kitted out with a fully equipped cinema. We're talking projection equipment, a giant screen, seating, and film canisters. In the room beside, there was a fully stocked bar and an informal restaurant, complete with tables and chairs, all wired with electricity and even phone lines. I know this sounds like an urban legend, but I promise it's true. When the police attempted to return the next day with the French Board of Electricity, all of the power had been cut, and there was a note on the floor that read, "Do not try to find us." According to Patrick Alk, an urban exploration expert, the discovery was, quote, "a shame, but not the end of the world. There are a dozen more where that one came from. You guys have no idea what's down there." Now, I don't know about you, but I find that story more chilling than the bones themselves. More recently, Airbnb caused quite a stir in 2015 when they advertised a night in the catacombs on their platform, complete with a real bed and a private concert. They reportedly paid €350,000 to rent out the entire catacombs for the night. Would you stay here? This proved rather controversial, as some questioned the ethics of the prize, with Parisian council members urging the mayor to remember that, quote, "respect due to the body does not cease with death." What do you think? Should Airbnb have been allowed to do this? Now, on that note, it's time for us to leave the catacombs today. We ascend now 120 stairs to make our way back to the surface. It's a very solemn feeling when we think about the centuries of the dead buried here in the catacombs, their names and identities lost to time. However, they do still play an important role in this strange museum, starring as the main tourist draw for one of the most visited museums in Paris. Now, what do you think about the ethics of this? Would you mind if your skeletal remains were on display for tourists? I think about things like this a lot, and I've decided that I would want my skull in the heart. But in all seriousness, it's a complex question, so share your thoughts in the comment section below. Well, that's the end of our tour here at the Catacombs in Paris. I hope you had a wonderful time, a macabre time, and an informative time. And I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum. Au revoir.